Month of protest in Algeria, yet no spontaneous cries of victory when the head of the military took to the airwaves Tuesday to announce it was time for Abdelaziz Bouteflika to go. For starters, most citizens believe Boutef has been gone a long time, perhaps as far back as 2013 when the 82-year-old president suffered a debilitating stroke. No one believes the Army Chief of Staff had suddenly discovered that the president was unwell, when up until the protests, the regime still planned to put his name on the ballot for a fifth term. Was Gaid Salah out of line even making the announcement? Does it signal that the military is siding with the biggest demonstrations the country's seen since independence from France, or trying to put a lid on those calling for the upending of what Algerians call le système, the system that's maintained itself in power since 1962? As the Constitutional Council decides whether to formally move to replace Bouteflika, the ball is clearly in the court of the street. How big will Friday's marches be this time around? In a nation still scarred by the blood years of the 90s and early 2000s, can the country peacefully seg out of the Bouteflika years? At what point does a leaderless movement need to designate leaders? Today in the France 24 debate, we're wondering if it is the final days for Bouteflika or for the regime. And with us to talk about France 24's Myriam Amelal. Thanks for joining us. Thanks as well to two young Algerians who live in France. Djibril Tachfine, born in France, to Algerian parents.
That's it.
And you're a student at the French Political Science Institute, Sciences Po.
That's it.
Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks as well to engineer Mehdi Brahimi. You came here to do your studies. And you're a member of the Ibtikar movement. Ibtikar, which means?
Innovation.
Innovation in Arabic. Joining us as well from Lancaster in Northwest England, PhD student, teaching assistant, Hiyam Chufra, who is at Lancaster University. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
The France 24 debate on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. One by one, they're distancing themselves from Abdelaziz Bouteflika after the head of the military, the big UGTA trade union confederation, saying it too wants to see the 82-year-old leader to go. Then there was the party of veteran politician Ahmed, who resigned as prime minister earlier this month when it was announced that Bouteflika would renege on a fifth term. And finally, Myriam Amelal, this communique coming from the main party itself, the FLN, backing that statement by the military. What does it all mean?
It's not very courageous. They should have done it maybe 10 years ago. They are supporting President Bouteflika for years, and now that the General Gaid Salah decided to announce that it will be better to use this Article 102 to impeach President Bouteflika. They are following him and supporting him because President Bouteflika is probably alone today, has no support anymore.
Is it a sign of splintering at the top, or is it a sign that everybody's rallying together, that they're all banding together?
They are just trying, I think, to save what they can save. It's because they were rejected. The FLN tried to join the movement, saying that we are supporting the movement, but it was too late. It's always too little too late with the regime. We have large demonstrations all over the country, and people demanding President Bouteflika not to run for a fifth consecutive mandate, people demanding President Bouteflika to withdraw and not to extend his fourth mandate, and now people demanding the system to go. And each time we have an answer or an announcement from the regime, it's always too late, and people are always shocked by the answer given by the regime.
All right, and this time on Tuesday, it was the military that was the one that launched it all, if you might say. The others taking their cue from the army. Several times in Algeria's history, it's the military that stepped in. So there was a measure of bated breath when it was the chief of staff who spoke on Tuesday. Shirley Sitbon explains.
Army Chief General Ahmed Gaid Salah and Abdelaziz Bouteflika belong to the same generation of Algerian leaders. Decades ago, when Algeria fought to break free from France, Salah was an officer in the Liberation Army. For years, he was a key ally for Bouteflika, and when the president's health declined, Salah was perceived as Algeria's strongman. When he stated Bouteflika should be declared unfit for office, some said he had ulterior motives.
Il veut avoir l'initiative.
The general wants to take the initiative and show everyone he has taken the initiative. His goal is to remain in power and to weaken the protest movement.
D'affaiblir cette mobilisation.
Since Algeria gained independence, the army has played a major political role. In 1965, an army colonel, Houari Boumediene, ousted the country's first democratically elected president, Ahmed Ben Bella. In 1992, during the decade of bloody terrorism, the military pushed out President Chadli Benjedid. In 1999, they placed Abdelaziz Bouteflika at the helm, although 20 years earlier, they blocked his candidacy. Army generals such as Rachid Benyal have denied they've had the power of ousting and imposing presidents. They say whatever they have done was not their own decision, but the execution of government orders.
So, Djibril Tachfine, is it the military that calls the shots in Algeria?
I think like the army has always been a critical role in Algeria, and like population is really ambiguous regarding like the army, and is really worried of what could be done by the army. So
yeah, what was your reaction when you heard the chief of staff tape recorded speech there on Tuesday?
My reaction was, I think, the same of all Algerians, where we were not expecting nothing about this declaration, and in fact, he is not like the right person like to declare this kind of appeal to implement the constitution, because like they made several examples during like past time that they didn't care like about the constitution. So it was like, it's a really ambiguous like position that the army took, and we couldn't know.
Were you surprised?
I think it's a way of making a new stratagem, like to save what they could save for the rest of the regime. So not surprised for this way of making the declaration.
How are people going to react, Mehdi Brahimi?
I think we have to remember one thing. Gaid Salah was appointed by Bouteflika. And Bouteflika, we didn't see him since 2013. So the Article 102 of the Constitution had to be applied 13 years ago, and not right now. So what we can see is just another trick of the military to keep themselves, to keep the power. I think what they want to do and what they plan is an interim presidency of 45 days to organize their elections with the same institutions since 10 years, and to save what they can save, as you said, and also.
Yeah, but how do you push them out? Because you saw in that report, the military is, if you look at Algeria's history, is there all the time. So they're not going to go away, are they?
I think people agreed about one thing. We need a transition phase. We need a transition phase. We need an audit of all the institutions, because we cannot move forward with the same institutions. And I think we will move them just by keeping protesting peacefully like we do, and also sending a message to the army. I think we need to send two messages to the army. The first one is that the Algerian issue has to stay Algerian, and we don't need to call the help of Russia or the international countries. Second thing is that we need to ask the army and the military to stay away from the
But
politics.
Will they though?
I think the let's say the ball is in the camp of Gaid Salah. He has to take the decision, and the right decision.
They're cornered. Hiam Shufra, do you agree that there's a chance that the army will take the right decision, or could the army take a very wrong decision in the eyes of Mehdi Brahimi?
Well, I think that this whole kind of step from the army was quite expected. But the thing is that what made us quite skeptical is why at this time specifically they could have announced to trigger the Act 102 a long time ago. Because why now? Why now coming up with this kind of decision? And the fact that it was from the Gaid Salah himself, who is seen as a loyal figure to Bouteflika, it made people quite skeptical about this. But I think that the whole kind of overarching power of the military institution in the Algerian political scene is something that we cannot deny. And the power of the army, I think, will be quite decisive in resolving
All right, we're having trouble with the audio quality with Lancaster, so hopefully we'll try to fix that. Apologies for that. The army, you can't ignore their presence. You just heard there from Hiem Shufra. You agree with that?
Of course, we can ignore their presence, but I think that as the Algerian population is changing and we saw a new generation taking to the street to demonstrate, the army is also changing. I think that we mustn't limit the army to Mr. Gaid Salah's personality.
He's 77 years old. He fought in the War of Independence.
He belonged to the old generation. Yeah. And I think that there's a group of men who represent this system inside the army, but the majority of the army is not representing Mr. Gaid Salah. I think that the population is calling when people demonstrate and take to the street to demand President Bouteflika to go and the system to go, they ask the army not to take part to political decision, but to accompany, to be here for the future transition. The army is extremely respected in Algeria. It symbolizes the independence. It symbolizes to the army population, and it also has fight against terrorism.
All right, let me play devil's advocate here, Mariam, because I remember clearly back in 2011 in Egypt, people were saying exactly what you just said, that yes, the Egyptian soldiers, they're from the people just like us, and then of course we know what happened.
It's not the same situation. I think that we can really compare. The history of Algeria is extremely different. The army has another place. It's extremely respected because you have a history. You have a country which was a French colony for 130 years. You have this independence war. Those figures, those heroes, like we saw, for example, Jamil.
And just as the Egyptian army embodied nationalism and
I think that it's not comparable, and we saw during those demonstrations not the army but the police demonstrating with people, and that was extremely that was unique. I think that the army is conscious, and I think there's two possibilities. We can say that Gaid Salah is trying to save what he can to save the system by sacrificing the Bouteflika clan and President Bouteflika. But I think that it can also be a pressure from the army, inside the army, which told him, now you have to stop supporting a president who is absent, and you have to try to find a constitutional issue to this crisis.
Yeah, you were going to say, Mehdi Brahimi.
I'm just going to say, I told that the case of Egypt, we've seen an international intervention, and some generals in the army, Egyptian army, supported by international institutions. I think it's not the case in Algeria, even if some people of the system and some military, we've seen the
Egyptian generals supported by international institutions.
Vice Prime Minister went to Russia and went to a tour in Europe also, and I think it's not the case in Algeria. That we need to ask the army to keep the issue an Algerian issue.
You're saying that the Algerian military doesn't have the same power or networks that the Egyptian one does?
Maybe not the, let's say, not all the army or the entire army. We know that the system is supporting an oligarchy in Algeria. And Gaid Salah is one of them.
So one of the questions we were wondering about, when state television announced Bouteflika's return from a long stay in hospital in Switzerland, this was back on March 11th, they showed these images on state television of Ahmed Gaid Salah in the company of Abdelaziz Bouteflika. And you were saying we haven't seen him in public since 2013. Of course, we did. We saw him wheeled out on Election Day in 2014 to cast his ballot. We've seen him at a few functions since then. But what do you make of those images? I'll put the Djibril Tachefine, I'll put the question to you. What did you make when you see these images on state television?
I think it's kind of ridiculous, like to make this operation of communication.
Well, you don't think it was actually that they actually met on the 11th of March?
I really don't know, but the fact is that they show that they broadcast this image at this particular moment. So it's kind of a proof that like. They knew like they were like already weak, and that they have to prove like to people like I'm alive. But that's not like the problem of Algeria. If like Bouteflika is alive or not, like it doesn't change like the situation. In fact, so
you're beyond Bouteflika himself. In other words.
Yeah. Of course, it's beyond. It's just it's not a personal case, but it's really like the system, and that's what people claim on the street. It's not just like the Bouteflika dégage, but it's about all the system which lasted for the 50 years.
All right, what happens next? We'll talk about it when we come back. You're watching the France 24 debate.
And I'm the France 24 correspondent in New Delhi. I cover news from India and other countries in South Asia. Catch me on our news bulletins from the region.
Mandakini Gallant, one of the 200 France 24 correspondents around the world. For tens of thousands of refugees in 2015, the Greek island of Lesbos became the gateway to Europe. For their welcome to the refugees, Greek islanders were in the running for a Nobel Peace Prize. But today, sympathy has given way to exasperation. Thousands of migrants remain stuck on the island, awaiting examination of their asylum requests. Their living conditions are inhumane. They risk losing everything. Our report highlights their plight and the exhaustion of the people of Lesbos.
We revisit the migrants of Lesbos all this week on France 24.
Welcome back. Before we resume the France 24 debate, some of the stories Laura Cellier is watching for you in the newsroom. All eyes on the House of Commons. The UK Parliament votes on a series of indicative measures to determine the way forward on Brexit, as Conservatives wait to see if Theresa May will formally tell the House that she'll be resigning in exchange for backbench support for her deal. We're expecting those votes around sometime after 9 p.m. Paris time. Live coverage right here. Algeria's longtime ruling party drops its support for ailing President Abdelaziz Bouteflika, backing the military's call for a change in leader. Protesters continue to demand wholesale change. Russia has to get out. Donald Trump talking about Venezuela in the wake of Moscow's dispatch of troops to Caracas to back the government of Nicolas Maduro. The wife of rival leader Juan Guaido welcomed to the White House earlier. Welcome back, or welcome if you're just joining us. It's the France 24 debate. Yeah, institutions in Algeria taking their cue from the military, which Tuesday said that it was calling for the removal of ailing President Abdelaziz Bouteflika, who's been incapacitated by a stroke since 2013. It's prompted the biggest marches that Algeria has seen since independence, and we'll be talking about what the size could be this coming Friday after that announcement. With us to talk about France 24's Myriam Amelal. Welcome back as well to Djibril Tachefine, born in France, to Algerian parents, and a student at the French Political Science Institute Sciences Po. Mehdi Brahimi, who is an engineer and a member of the
Ibtikar, political and citizen movement.
Political and citizen movement. Not quite a political party.
We're not a party or movement. We consider that we don't have democracy in Algeria, so it doesn't make sense to be a party.
All right. PhD student and teaching assistant Hiem Shufra is with us from Lancaster University in northwest England. Welcome back, Hiem. We were wondering before the break, can anyone from that state apparatus, now that the military has given that nudge, and the military, we talked about its divisions, can anyone from that state apparatus emerge as a consensus figure who can lead Algeria during this transition process to come? Owen Barnell takes a look.
Left out in the cold, time is running out for Algeria's president, Abdelaziz Bouteflika. For over a month, his allies backed him, but as protests continue, the pressure is becoming too much for Algeria's elite to ignore.
The protesters are peaceful, but the longer this goes on, the greater the risk of slipping into violence. And that's why I think everybody, particularly the army that's in charge of security, wishes to avoid that possibility.
The ruling elites are searching for his successor. But what is likely to happen next? If Bouteflika resigns or is termed unfit to lead, the next step is elections, only a couple of months down the line.
It is not enough time for potential candidates to emerge from the current protest movement and for them to be judged properly.
Elections favour Algeria's elite. For years, every winner has been pre-selected by the country's ruling class. If they do happen, there are likely several establishment candidates. Liamine Zeroual, the retired general and former president, he made way voluntarily in 1999 for Bouteflika himself, amidst rumoured corruption and health concerns. Next, Noureddine Bedaoui, Algeria's current prime minister, appointed earlier this month in an attempt to appease protesters. His appointment did not go down well. The former interior minister was criticised for simply continuing the status quo. Finally, Ramtan Lamamra, current vice prime minister and former foreign minister, his career as Algeria's ambassador to the US, Ethiopia and Djibouti mean he's in the frame. Whether Algeria's protest movement will accept a transition imposed from on high this time around remains to be seen.
Lots of reactions on the hashtag F24 debate, including this one. Article 102, that's the process of getting rid of the president, was meant to be applied after he suffered that stroke in 2013. In several instances after, the face of the system has been removed, but le pouvoir, the power, that's under the guidance of the military, remains. Hashtag Algeria. Hiem Shufra, your reaction in that report, any of those personalities palatable enough in your eyes to perhaps ensure a transition period?
I think none of them will be actually kind of accepted by the people. The people want someone who's not attached in any way to the le système. I think that one of the weaknesses, I would say, in my opinion, one of the weaknesses of this movement is that this kind of the absence of leadership, which leads to this kind of absence of consensus on a person, or at least like a spokesperson who would kind of echo the concerns of the movement. So it's still quite open whether who's the figure that will kind of represent the people. I mean, it needs to be, the people are aware that it needs to have some kind of political background, but not attached to the old regime in any way, I guess.
Yeah, because, sorry to hark back to Egypt once more, but in 2011, those in Tahrir Square prided themselves on being a leaderless movement. But in the end, the liberals who started the uprising against Mubarak, they didn't play when it came time for elections.
Yeah, that's why I said that it's one of the weaknesses, because being leaderless movement, it can be a positive thing because there's no such kind of hierarchical division. The people are speaking as one, but at the same time, the people need a spokesperson, at least someone who would represent them and negotiate on their behalf, which is lacking in this current movement in Algeria, I guess.
Mehdi Brahimi, you agree?
I agree partly. I think people are organizing themselves, and the system gave us more time to organize ourselves. I've seen a lot of like universities in Algeria that decided to organize themselves and elected someone who will represent the university. I've seen a lot of people from lawyers and also people from the institutions who organized themselves to make proposals to the people. I think we will soon see like leaders coming up from the people, and
so you take Hiem's point that the movement does need a leader at this time.
Yeah, because the military are against us for the moment, and we need that. We will ask Gaid Salah to resign, and after if Gaid Salah goes from the military, from the army, I think we can highlight some leaders or appoint some leaders.
I think that they're aware that it's a weakness not to have people to represent them. I think that they are organizing themselves. I agree with you. There's some debates organized at universities all around the country in Algiers. There's the lawyers who also take part to the debates and trying to organize themselves with the civil society. I think that they need time because they don't want to be manipulated. We are in a country where manipulation was extremely present. They are aware of that. Even if it's a new generation, they know what happened in the past throughout their parents and their grandparents. They are very cautious and suspicious toward the army, toward the political parties. They don't want to be manipulated by those. They need time. They try to do it. It's a weakness, of course, because sooner or later they will have to organize themselves and have some personalities or one personality.
But do they have the time that you're mentioning? You say it takes time, you give them time, but
I think
the
that it's
military,
better.
those that
They
have
know.
the reins of power now, they're not going to give them time.
I think that they are aware that they don't have a lot of time, but that they have to take their time to choose the right person and not to be manipulated, because it's a risk. And maybe it's better to take time, even if we don't have a lot of time, than to choose the wrong person.
The Djibril Tashfin, people have been saying since the outset, it's a young people's movement, but they better watch out because we don't want to go back to 1988 when there was repression of the university movement. We don't want to go back to the blood years when there was an all-out civil war. No violence. We don't want a power vacuum. What do you think when people constantly remind young Algerians of the past?
I think the past is in every Algerian mind. Like the Black Decade is really a traumatism for all Algerians, and that's a change in a way because like people know now what they don't want. So this is the basis of the mobilization that would arise like Pacific. And this is a change. And again, I join your point of view with like the necessity like to take the time to organize
But take the time to do what? Take the time to do what? What's the ultimate goal? What, a new constitution?
But for me, it's just like a change for Algeria because there is no political scene since the independence, and it's the first time that people just gather in the street, so reappropriate the street as their own, and also like debate and create this space for free speech. So this is a crucial moment that people like can take their citizenship and just like debate with other Algerians. So this moment is really determinant for the future of Algeria and to build this transitional path. Yeah.
But sooner or later you'll have to have elections, right?
Yes, but I think again I think Algerians agree that they should like take time and step aside, make kind of a break to build like new institutions.
How much time have you got realistically?
There are two things. The first thing is that after the 28th of April, we don't have no more articles in the Constitution. Okay, but I think we don't have to be afraid to be out of the Constitution. This is the first thing. Secondly, I think the main goal is to have or to build a transition government, which will lead the transition phase. And the transition phase will maybe last 1 year or 2 years.
And what do you need for that? Someone who's experienced, who knows how power works?
We need technocrats.
Right.
We need people in the institutions. We need, and we have it in Algeria. We need also maybe not the institutional opposition, but the real opposition.
What's the real opposition in Algeria?
I don't know. In my opinion, is the opposition that never participated in this government. This is real opposition, and you have parties who never participated in the government. So you have lawyers. I'm a part of political movement. I'm not a specialist in this transition. I can't draw up a transition phase, but I think the right thing to do is to build this government transition.
Hiem Shofra, you agree?
Yeah, I do agree. We talked about the absence of leadership, but I think that one of the other weaknesses is the absence of a substitute, a clear and a well-defined substitute. If we just remove the regime, this will create a huge gap. That's why I think that the military kind of opted for this, for triggering the Act 102. How much time do we need? I think it's quite debatable, and it needs a lot of work, I guess.
Now when we had a change in Egypt, when we had a change in Tunisia, elections then come around, and the people in the opposition as defined there by Mehdi, the opposition that's never been associated with the old regime, well, that oftentimes is the Islamists. Now, in Algeria, back in 1991, you had the Islamists who were set for a landslide win. You had a coup and then a civil war. This time around, how should the Islamists be involved in the process? Should they have their own political parties? Should we have an equivalent of what was then the Islamic Salvation Front, the FIS? How does it work?
I think that when you talk about opposition in Algeria, it's quite non-existent, I would say. The opposition is what the regime kind of left on the margin. It's just a bit of an extension of the regime of some sort, and the people are quite conscious about that. Talking about the Islamist parties, I don't think that the people now have experienced the Black Decade and the events of the 1990s, and I don't think that the Islamist party would be an option for the people, or that an option that the people will opt for eventually.
You agree with that, Mariam Amela?
I was thinking about another thing concerning Islamists. I grew up in Algeria during that period of Black Decades, and I have that experience. And when I see today the images of the demonstration, people are gathering themselves. At the time when you saw, for example, if you remember the demonstration organized by the FIS, there were only people from the party demonstrating with Islamist signs and with the Quran, and today we saw the young demonstrators, the protesters. They have the constitution, they don't have the Quran. They want to base their fight with the constitution. It doesn't mean that the society is not conservative, that Islam is not present in Algerian society, but people learned to live together. Those demonstrations, you can see religious person, people who are not religious at all, young people, old people, children. Every Algerian, it's a family. It's like a family. People don't have the same convictions, religious or political convictions, but they gather themselves. And I think that Islamism, as we as we have experienced in the past, is dead today in Algeria. Maybe we will have another form of Islamism, but not the same as in the past years.
Djibril Tachfine?
Yeah, I agree totally. And for me, like the comparison with Tunisia is really inappropriate, because Tunisia was not the same division, and it exists, like it already exists, this political scene with like a Bourguibist from a side and Islamists in the other side, and it's still quite the case. But in Algeria, as Kaima said, with the Black Decade, it's really in all the conscious, and people like know what they don't want. And Islamism in that way won't exist, I think, in Algeria, and I hope it won't. exist again.
So what, in your view,
shape.
what will the opposition look like? You heard the definition of Mehdi, which was basically anybody who hasn't played ball with the current regime.
Yeah, but it's not homogeneous. Like there is a lot of silent people from the regime that will now have this scene of debate, and they express like different point of view. It's really interesting when you go to République in Paris. You can
Place de la République, where there have been rallies every weekend supporting the movement.
Yeah, like from the diaspora perspective, that you can hear like a lot of different point of view, but now it's not like it's the moment like to debate, but the first step we have to keep this in mind is just like the go of the system, and then we can think about the future.
What I want to say about Islamists, a few days ago, Ali Belhadri, which is a foreign member of FIS, went
one of the leaders.
Yeah, one of the leaders went to the streets to protest with people, and people respond to them with his group by dégage, so go out from the protest. This is really important. People doesn't want this kind of Islamist parties no more. And also, I want to add something. I told you that we need 1 year or 2 years transition phase, because right now we don't have real opposition. We cannot create an NGO in Algeria. We cannot create a party without agreement of the institutions. So we need to rebuild our institutions to organize new elections with new citizens and new parties in the future.
I think that's the reason why the activation of the Article 102 will be rejected by the population. We'll see this probably these days with the demonstrations, because this article, according to this article, we will have only at least four months to organize the elections and the opposition, and it needs more time, probably a year or two, to organize the transition. And that's why the some Algerian people, some lawyers, talk about the Article 7, which stipulates that it is the population that has the right to organize itself like a referendum. And a lot of people consider that those demonstrations gathering millions of people is to some extent a referendum. It's a legitimacy for them to organize themselves with a committee to lead this transition.
Hiam Shufra, you're listening to Miriam Amelal. They're speaking in terms of the current constitution written by those who are right now in power. Is that the only way forward, that you don't want to have nothing to look to hark back to until you have new rules?
I think one of the clear demands of the people is not just the rejuvenation of the regime, or just the removal of Bouteflika, but this whole rejuvenation of the constitution itself, which is not serving the demands of the people right now. And I think that the people have asked for the kind of activation of the Act 102 for so long now. But the thing is that they want put Bouteflika, that kind of classifies Bouteflika as unfit physically to rule the country, but they don't want the constitutional substitute that this act would ultimately present.
And Hiam, you heard Djibril Tachfine describe what it's like going to those rallies of the diaspora here in Paris that take place every weekend in support of the protest movement. What's it like watching it all from Lancaster in northwest England?
Yeah, it's quite frustrating actually not to be part of this whole kind of euphoric moment, with very historical moment. It's quite frustrating, but I would describe myself as a distant social media participant. I know that the term is quite problematic, but I'm kind of participating through different social media outlets, which are in themselves sort of a public space. But yeah, it's quite frustrating not to be part of the ground. I mean, the movement on the ground.
And your prediction regarding this coming Friday?
Sorry, pardon?
Your prediction regarding the turnout this coming Friday?
I think it will be the biggest, one of the biggest movements, if not the biggest.
All right, we'll leave it there. I want to thank you so much, Iyam Shufra, for joining us from Lancaster. I want to thank as well Miriam Amelal, Djibril Tashfin, Mehdi Brahmi. Stay with us, though. Media Watch is next.